On the day I gave birth, my husband proposed to his girlfriend. The next day, Frank rushed back to take care of me. He showed great concern for me, so much so that I even thought that video might just be my hallucination. When I finished my confinement, I went out to sweat and heard a noise in the stairwell. The people inside came out entwined. It was my husband and his young girlfriend. I looked at them and said softly, "What a coincidence." I felt severe contractions and there was a wetness coming from below. My water broke and I was about to give birth. It was a few days earlier than expected. Originally, I thought I would wait for Frank to come back from his business trip and then go to the hospital for delivery, but plans can't keep up with changes. Today happened to be the Mid-Autumn Festival and the aunt also went home for a reunion. Thinking of this, I picked up my phone and called 120. When I was taken away by the ambulance, I called Frank but no one answered. Then I called my mother. She said, "Winnie, Mom still has to take care of the children and won't go. When you finish giving birth, I'll ask your brother to take us all there." Before she finished speaking, there was a noisy sound at that end. She just hung up the phone. On this almost family reunion day, I was left alone. Before making this call, I had already expected it. But there was still a glimmer of hope in my heart. What if she felt sorry for me? The hope was dashed and the sadness in my heart and the pain in my body came together and mingled. The cervix opened quickly. After getting the epidural, the pain gradually eased. I wiped away my tears and waited for the delivery. The baby was born smoothly, a small wrinkled one. I felt extremely tired and my body was exhausted. I was pushed into the ward and soon fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept. When I woke up, I was still alone with my newly born little daughter. She didn't cry or make noise and didn't even open her eyes. I picked up my phone from the bedside table. Before I could call Frank, I received a WeChat message. It was a video. The person in it was my husband. It should be in a private room of a bar. He held a ring and knelt on one knee and said to a very young girl who looked only 20 years old, "Xiaobao, will you marry me?" Then there was a burst of noise. When I closed the video and wanted to ask when this video was taken, I saw that the person had already withdrawn it and the message I sent out became a red exclamation mark. There was no note, a stranger sent me a strange video. But I clearly saw that it was Frank. I called Frank but his voice sounded outside the door. He pushed the door open and walked gently in front of me. He looked at the little treasure lying beside me before looking at me. He tucked my hair behind my ear and kissed my forehead. "Sorry, wife. I was really too busy with work yesterday and couldn't rush back. You really worked hard." I stared at him straight and my hands couldn't help shaking. The emotion swelled in my heart and soon I suppressed it again. Tears overflowed from my eyes and I threw myself into his arms. He gently stroked my back and soothed my emotions. As gentle as usual, as if nothing had changed at all. That video also seemed more like a prank. But in my heart, something had quietly changed. Just after giving birth, I couldn't cry for too long as it would hurt my eyes. Frank discussed with me whether to go to the confinement center, but I really didn't want to live in a strange environment. Following my advice, he found 2 confinement nurses for me. He also almost never left my side. He also took on the responsibility of feeding the baby at night. I didn't mention the video and neither did he until one late night, he received a call. He got up from the bed and tiptoed to the bathroom. I quietly sat up and followed. The voice inside came out and he said, "Baby, don't be afraid. I'll come to accompany you soon." The voice was very small but it reached my ears word for word. Then I walked back gently. Lying on the bed with my eyes closed, tears slipped from the corners of my eyes and my heart seemed to be tightly grasped by a pair of big hands. But I couldn't make a scene. During the confinement period, it would hurt my body. Everything would wait until after the confinement. Soon, the other side of the bed sank and he circled me in his arms. His big hand covered my small hand. But everything had changed. He had someone outside. Even on the day I gave birth, he proposed to someone. At this moment, I seemed to fall into an abyss and couldn't help shivering all over. When would he ask me for a divorce? I was even a little curious. The next day, he got up and went to the study to deal with work. I lay on the bed and covered my head with the quilt and stared at the curtain without blinking. The curtain blocked the light tightly and nothing could be seen clearly. The confinement nurse brought the baby over and I took the baby in her arms and breastfed her. Then when I went out to have breakfast in a daze, I saw Frank carrying a food bag from a high-end restaurant. It was my favorite wontons from this restaurant. This restaurant doesn't accept takeout and is often sold out early in the morning. He took it out of the bag and put it on the table and opened the lid and said with a smile in his voice, "I queued for half an hour to buy it and it's still hot." Then he handed the spoon to me, "Eat quickly." The confinement nurse said, "Madam, your husband really loves you." The aunt said, "The relationship between the husband and wife has always been very good." Before, I also thought so. When did he change? I stared at him in a daze and the person in front of me clearly didn't change in appearance or anything. Maybe seeing me in a daze, Frank smiled and poked me, "Eat quickly. It won't taste good when it's cold." Oh, okay. I came to my senses and bowed my head to eat. I only ate 2 bites and couldn't eat any more. There seemed to be something blocking my stomach and I couldn't swallow it and couldn't spit it out either. So I simply put down the spoon and got up to see the child. The child in my arms was soft and didn't cry or make noise. My appetite became worse and I often vomited after eating. I could feel my mood was bad. Whenever I was on the verge of losing control, I pulled myself back. The breast milk also became bad and the child could only drink formula milk. Frank brought the soup to me and said to me, "Would you like to drink some soup? If this continues, your body..." Before he finished speaking, my mood came up and I couldn't control it at all. I said, "I don't want to drink." "Why can't you understand? Can you stay away from me?" He still wanted to say something but I waved my hand and the soup bowl in his hand fell to the ground. Some of it also spilled on my hand. Instantly, it turned red. He hurriedly pulled me to take a shower but I didn't feel any pain. I became numb and also like a shrew. If this continues, I will soon not recognize myself. I tried hard to adjust my mood. Frank no longer forced me to drink soup and if there was no breast milk, we would feed formula milk. The child would grow up anyway. The days passed smoothly. My mood gradually improved. On the day I finished my confinement, Frank told me that he had something to do and couldn't accompany me to sweat. I casually replied, "Okay, you go and get busy." The aunt held the child and went out and my mood gradually improved. On the day I finished my confinement, Frank told me that he had something to do and couldn't accompany me to sweat. I casually replied, "Okay, you go and get busy." The aunt held the child and went out and I followed behind. We went to the underground garage together but my phone was left upstairs. When I went back to get it, I heard a noise in the stairwell. At this moment, suspicion arose and couldn't be suppressed. I slowly walked forward and stood at the door. There was a female voice inside. The voice was both greasy and sweet and she said, "Why don't you come to see me? Do you know that I haven't seen you for a month and I miss you so much in my heart?" "I miss you too but she is in confinement and I can't mention divorce. Can you wait a little longer?" Soon, the sound of kissing and moaning came out. I leaned against the wall and listened and took my hand off the doorknob. Soon, the people inside opened the door. They came out entwined and were about to go home. The woman saw me first and her expression froze and she pushed the man in her arms. Frank stopped in his tracks and looked back at me. I looked at them and just said softly, "What a coincidence." Frank came forward to pull me but I dodged. I asked them, "Are you going home?" I walked forward on my own and opened the door at home and motioned for them to come in and not make a fool of themselves outside. The woman followed behind Frank and slowly entered the door. At the moment they entered the door, I closed the door. I looked at them again, "Do what you want to do." They didn't move and the air fell into silence. Frank frowned and stood in front of me and put his hands on my shoulders and my eyes met his. He said, "Winnie, listen to me explain." At this moment, I was completely angry and waved his hands away. "What do you want to explain? Explain that you proposed to her when I gave birth or that you flirted in the bathroom when I was in confinement." I withdrew my eyes and walked to the woman. I reached out and grabbed her clothes and pretended to take them off. She shouted and pushed me and told me to get away. Frank came to me and pinched my hand and threw me away and shouted at me, "Winnie, have you had enough?" Then he lowered his head and gently asked her, "Did she hurt you?" She huddled in Frank's arms and was in tears. I watched this scene and the strength in my body seemed to be drained and I leaned against the sofa to not fall down. After a long time, I asked him, "When did you two get together?" Frank comforted the person in his arms and then looked up at me. "If it weren't for your pregnancy, I would have wanted to mention divorce to you long ago. You have been emotionally unstable since last year and everyone has to watch your face and you lose your temper at the slightest impatience. Do I owe you?" I staggered and sat on the sofa and I gasped for breath and it took me a long time to recover. So it was before I got pregnant. I lowered my eyes and didn't ask why because I know it's meaningless. There is no specific content in 04 in your text. If you want to continue translating the following text, please feel free to provide it and I will continue to help you. I've been emotionally unstable and it didn't start last year. Perhaps I've never been stable. When in love, everything seems good. Even losing one's temper or giving the silent treatment can be described as being full of personality. When the love is gone, I've become a crazy woman and someone who deserves nothing from him, and the woman behind him is gentle and considerate. Even when she cries, she looks so charming that it can arouse people's desire to protect her. I waited until my emotions calmed down a bit before continuing. In that case, let's get a divorce. Okay, he replied. Frank turned around and went into the study. He took out the divorce agreement from it and placed it in front of me. He had even prepared all these things long ago. Yet he still pretended to be a nice guy in front of me. How ridiculous. He handed the divorce agreement and a fountain pen to me. When I flipped through it, I saw his signature. The ink of the signature had dried up and I didn't know when he had signed it. Probably a long time ago. Our family isn't that wealthy. We run a small company. I own 2 houses and a car. In the agreement, he left the houses and the car to me, as well as 10% of the company's shares for our child. I signed my name at the signature place and pushed it in front of him, saying, "Pack your things and get out of here." Frank didn't hesitate to hold his young girlfriend's hand and leave the house. He didn't want anything in the house anymore, including his own child. I curled up in the corner of the sofa. The moment he closed the door, tears welled up in my eyes. It felt like my heart was tightly grasped by a pair of big hands. Even though I had been prepared for it, it still hurt deeply and made me feel extremely uncomfortable. The nanny saw that I hadn't come downstairs for a long time, so she carried the child upstairs. As soon as she opened the door, she said, "Madam, I met Mr. in the elevator." When she saw my tear-stained face, she exclaimed a few times. She asked me, "What's wrong?" From now on, there will only be a madam in this family, and no Mr. anymore. I stood up, feeling a sudden darkness before my eyes. It took me a long time to see clearly. Then, I walked towards the bedroom step by step. All my schedules were messed up, and I even forgot about the sweating problem. These days, I had been waiting at home for Frank to inform me to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. It wasn't until half a month later that he finally got in touch with me to discuss the time and take me to the Civil Affairs Bureau to handle the divorce formalities. I sat in the back seat and didn't say a word. After signing the agreement for the divorce cooling-off period and coming out, I stood at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau and asked him, "Did you feel good when you were with her?" "Yes, everything was good between us. Come to think of it, it was indeed good. Being young and beautiful is that girl's advantage. After divorcing me and marrying her, giving her a home might be his truest thought in his heart." I asked him to take me back. We sat in the car without saying a word all the way. When we arrived at the underground parking lot, he asked me, "Can I go upstairs to see Gigi?" Hearing his words, I let out a light laugh and asked rhetorically, "When you were in her bed, why didn't you think that you still had a child?" "From now on, I won't let you see her." I got out of his car and walked forward step by step. From now on, my child would have no father. On a peaceful afternoon, I received an express delivery. I tore it open and found Frank's physical examination report. It was sent by the person I arranged to take him for the physical examination. On the examination results, there was a line of words, "Suspected colon cancer." No wonder he often had diarrhea, staying in the toilet for a long time without coming out, and sometimes even had bloody stools. I put this report in the wardrobe, looked at my daughter who was still sleeping soundly, and an idea came to my mind. I asked the nanny to help look after the child and went to the Civil Affairs Bureau to withdraw the divorce application. A month later, Frank called me and made an appointment with me to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to handle the time for getting the divorce certificate. I looked at my newly done manicure on this end and said with a smile, "I've thought about it. Let's not get divorced for now." There were crying sounds on the other end. I took a look at the phone interface and hung up and blocked his number in one go. Half a year later, if Frank died, then the rest of his property would belong to me and my child. If nothing happened, then I wouldn't lose anything even if we got divorced again. Although the manicure was done poorly, it still couldn't hide my good mood. Frank and I met and fell in love in college. He was my senior fellow student in the same major. To pursue me, he brought me breakfast every day and accompanied me to the classroom for classes. Even after graduation, when he was busy with work, he would still come to the school to find me, just to see me. At that time, I also loved him deeply. Seeing the tiredness in his eyes, I felt nothing but heartache. I told him, "We can also meet on weekends. We don't have to meet every 2 days." He hugged me and smiled, kissing me. "I wish I could see you once every hour." At first, we couldn't afford a house in the North City and could only rent one to live in. He hugged me and said, "Winnie, when our life gets better in the future, I'll buy you a car and a house." I hugged him back and replied, "Okay." He didn't break his promise. Later, the 2 houses he bought were all under my name. Even the house he bought for my parents with his money was also under my name. To make it convenient for my travel, he bought me a car. However, people are always changeable. When life got better, there were no big waves, only endless dullness left. Perhaps because of this dullness, he began to feel that such a life was a bit boring. He started to want some excitement and also began to dislike my emotional instability. Even, he thought the women outside were more charming. Thinking of those past events, I just felt a stabbing pain in my heart. The spring festival was coming soon. In the past, Frank would take me back to his hometown during the spring festival, but this year, we couldn't go. After the nanny left, only my daughter and I were left at home. So I decided to go back to my mother's home for the spring festival. When I opened the door, I saw my mother and my nephew playing games. Seeing me coming, she smiled and welcomed me in. I put the child on the sofa, played with her by shaking her gently, and chatted with my mother about daily life. As soon as my father came in, he asked me, "Why didn't Frank come?" "We're having some problems and are getting a divorce recently," I replied casually. This sentence, however, caused my father's dissatisfaction. He looked at me with a cold face, and his anger was clearly shown on his face. I looked at him and asked casually, "What's wrong? Winnie, are you stupid? When life gets better, you don't know your place. Without Frank, could our family be what it is today? Go, even if you have to kneel down and beg him. You can't let him divorce you." He attributed all the achievements to Frank. "But the company belongs to both of us, not just Frank." Even my mother advised me not to get divorced, saying that getting divorced is not a glorious thing after all, and people would laugh at us when they hear about it. They didn't ask me what had happened. They only cared about being laughed at by others. Seeing that I was sitting still on the sofa, my father came to pull me, asking me to go to Frank today to beg for reconciliation, or else he would cut off relations with me. I wanted to laugh but couldn't. I said softly, "How can you say that about your own daughter?" I thought that as long as I didn't get angry, this matter would pass, but my father's face became even darker. "If you want to get divorced, get out of here. Don't enter our house again," he shouted at me. When I was a child, they were also like this. They beat and scolded me endlessly, but doted on my younger brother infinitely. After I grew up and started making money, they began to say that those were all helpless acts. I believed all their words. When my younger brother needed to buy a car and a house, they came to me and asked me to pay for it, and I did, but I was cautious and said that I would handle the real estate certificate, and the house was put under my name. The house belongs to me, and they only have the right to live in it. In the years after I grew up, I had been deceiving myself that my parents actually loved me, even if just a little. So, when I couldn't get in touch with Frank when giving birth and called my mother, hoping that she could come to accompany me, or even just come to have a look, I got the answer that she was busy. She said that she would come to see me at home after the child was born. I was also waiting for her, but by the time I was out of the confinement period and another half a month had passed, she still hadn't come. At that time, I knew that she wouldn't come to see me, but when my younger brother's child was born, my father asked me to buy a gold bracelet and give it to my nephew. In their hearts, I could never compare to their son, obviously. All the big and small things they were using were bought by me. I was the one who took care of my mother when she was sick, even so, it couldn't exchange for even a little bit of their love. In fact, they thought that all these were what a sister or a daughter should do. They thought about their son, and when their grandson was born, they thought about their grandson. But they never thought about their daughter. But why? When it came to dividing things, they didn't think of me. When they needed money or someone to take care of things, they thought of me. The thought that they had never loved me grew stronger in my heart, but I realized it a bit too late. I stood up, looked at them, and said in a low voice, "You probably don't know that when handling the real estate certificate for this house, it was me who went to handle it and it was put under my name. So if anyone should leave, it's you. If you want to continue living here, pay me the rent according to the market price every month. Otherwise, I'll find someone to ask you to move out." I picked up the child on the sofa and walked straight towards the door. My father's slap hit my back, and curses rang out behind me. The pain came, and tears were welling up in my eyes, but I never looked back and stepped out of this home. Everyone was reuniting during this new year, but I didn't have a home anymore. I haven't received the rent for a long time. Ask someone to send my parents, my younger brothers and his wife's things back to our hometown and change the locks. By the way, they came to make a scene with me, saying that I was vicious and would come to a bad end. After making a fuss for a while, they began to beg. Some people are always insatiable. Sometimes they don't think it's good when they have it, but when it's taken away from them, they start praying that it can be returned to them. However, those things never belong to them. I called the police and had them driven away. Auntie sat in front of me and brought me a bowl of soup. I looked up and asked her, "Was it really my fault?" "No," she replied. She pulled out a chair and sat down, then said softly, "Sometimes it's like this. When you do too well, they think you're not good enough. When you do something extreme, they think you're too extreme. Anyway, you can never satisfy them. You're over 30 now. It's enough as long as you're satisfied with yourself." Sometimes, my parents are even worse than strangers. In the past, they would try to manipulate me by saying that they gave birth to my younger brother to give me someone from my mother's side of the family who could help me stand up for myself when I was bullied in the future. In reality, however, even they bullied and insulted me. I took small sips of the soup. Suddenly, the baby who was sleeping in the room started crying. Auntie went into the room to comfort the baby. Before the crying stopped, the person inside shouted to me, "Madam, Gigi has a high fever." I touched her forehead and it was indeed hot. Auntie put the baby down and started packing things. I quickly changed my clothes and went downstairs together. We soon rushed to the hospital. It was acute pneumonia and she needed to be hospitalized. When I went to handle the hospitalization procedures for the child, I ran into Frank and his girlfriend at the payment counter. Her limbs were slender and her lower abdomen was slightly bulging. At a glance, it could be seen that she was pregnant. No wonder she was so eager for Frank to get a divorce, and no wonder Frank proposed to her. I had found out the reason for everything. I held the payment slip and walked forward slowly with a faint smile. They turned around and saw me and were stunned for a moment. Before they could speak, I said on my own, "What a coincidence. Are you here for a prenatal checkup?" Frank was about to say something, but before he could say it, the person beside him preempted him. "Yes, I'm having twins. Unlike you who only gave birth to a little girl. Frank said he prefers sons." "Really?" I asked rhetorically. "Then congratulations to you too." The moment I turned around, my expression changed. This child must not be born. I hired someone to investigate Frank's girlfriend and her daily movements. I learned that her name was Shirley and she used to work in an advertising company. Now she had already left her job, probably to take care of her pregnancy. She didn't go out often and would occasionally go to the company to bring food to Frank. I could hardly find a place where I could get close to her, until an invitation to a dinner party was sent to our home. I thought that Frank would definitely take her with him. The reason why she often went to the company to bring food to Frank was also to declare her ownership. On such a good occasion, she would surely follow. I left the child with Auntie, changed into a dress and went out. As soon as I entered the venue, many people called me Mrs. Frank. Before, they used to call me Winnie. Since I chose to focus on my family, I had only one identity, that is, Frank's wife. I took care of all the affairs behind Frank, but he couldn't see my efforts. I saw Shirley following Frank from a distance. She held his arm, stepped on high heels, and wore a long dress. This outfit was really nice, and it also made it convenient for me to take action. If she hadn't been wearing high heels, perhaps I would have had to think of other ways. But now, the situation was very favorable to me. I waited for an opportunity in the corner and saw Shirley walking over alone. She walked extremely slowly, step by step, as if she was afraid of falling. I walked towards her and accidentally bumped into her. The wine glass in my hand shook, and the wine spilled on the ground. She reached out and pushed me away and walked on by herself. She was about to step on the wine spilled on the ground. I counted in my heart, and soon her body suddenly lurched forward uncontrollably. She slipped, and everything was going as I had planned. Blood flowed out from under her and stained her yellow dress red. Perhaps it was very painful. As cold sweat broke out on her forehead, she pointed at me and said weakly, "It's you, Winnie, it's you. What's wrong with me?" I took a step back to distance myself from her. There are so many people on this occasion. If I had done something, wouldn't others have seen it? I just accidentally bumped into you. Your slipping has nothing to do with me. Did I push you? There was chaos all around, but no one dared to step forward. Frank pushed through the crowd, picked up the person on the ground, and walked out quickly, and I watched their backs and couldn't help smiling secretly. An illegitimate child should never be born. Even if born, it would be despised by everyone. I've solved a big problem for them. It's okay if they don't thank me, but they still blame me. I held the wine glass and drank up the remaining wine in one gulp. Soon, I got the news that Shirley's child was gone. She kept crying and making a fuss in the ward, asking Frank to give her an explanation. She forced him to divorce me and marry her. And Frank had never been a good person. He gave Shirley a sum of money and never went to see her again. The reason why he took a fancy to Shirley was simple. One was that she was young and beautiful. The other was that he wanted her to have children for him, because I had said that I would only have one child in my life. And there was only one reason for abandoning her. Because she had hurt her body and couldn't have children anymore and couldn't give birth to the son he wanted. Shirley came to my door and kept cursing me. I didn't want to open the door to see her at first, but she kept cursing my daughter outside the door. I opened the door, looked at her face, and slapped her hard. Try cursing one more word and see what happens. She rushed at me. She had just been discharged from the hospital and didn't have much strength. I grabbed her hair and dragged her into the room, making her look in the mirror. In front of the mirror, she suddenly froze. The person in the mirror had red eyes. The dark circles under her eyes couldn't be covered no matter what, and her lips were also terribly pale. She looked extremely ugly. She asked me, "You did it on purpose, didn't you? Do you have any evidence?" I asked rhetorically. "That day, I just accidentally bumped into you and accidentally spilled the wine. It wasn't on purpose at all." She looked at me and laughed softly with tears on her face. I wanted to pity her, but if I pitied her, who would pity me? She walked out step by step, and I followed her behind and saw her out. When she was about to enter the elevator, I stopped her. "You're in such a good age. Is it really worth it to be so desperate for a man who doesn't care about you?" "Yes, I love him very much." Hearing her words, I couldn't help laughing. The irony spread. "Then you're really immoral. Falling in love with a married man, destroying his family, and ending up like this is what you deserve." She didn't say anything more and entered the elevator and went down slowly. I moved with my child. It was too unsafe here. Frank had an access card and could enter the community, and so did my parents. These messy things really annoyed me. There had been no news from Frank. I originally thought that the result on the medical examination report might be a misdiagnosis. Then I heard that he fainted at a dinner party and was rushed to the hospital. His assistant contacted his mother, and his mother contacted me. I rushed to the hospital again. As soon as I entered, I saw the person on the bed curled up into a ball. Seeing me coming, his assistant came up to me and said, "Madam, the doctor said it might be cancer." "Really?" I looked at him with a smile and patted him on the shoulder. "Thank you for your hard work today." I hired a caregiver to take care of Frank, and I sat beside the hospital bed, playing with my mobile phone alone and accompanying him during his fasting period. He couldn't eat or drink for 24 hours. He was going to have examinations and a biopsy tomorrow. I had to wait for the results, and I could leave only after getting the results. When Frank opened his eyes and saw me, his hands kept shaking. He asked me, "Why are you here?" I raised my head from the mobile phone screen and looked at him. "Your mother contacted me and asked me to come and see you." Then, silence fell again. He didn't want to talk to me, and I had nothing to say to him either. So we just remained silent. I was a bit tired and curled up on the sofa to take a nap. In my dream, I suddenly remembered his words about having to watch my face. However, during these years of marriage, I had been dutiful to him. When I was 29, I fell ill. After that, my body had been in a subhealthy state. When I got a bit better, I started preparing for pregnancy. So I never went back to work. I focused on my family, took care of everything at home, and also helped him maintain relationships. From the beginning to the end, I didn't know him anything. Everything in the dreams seemed to drag me and pull me. Soon, I woke up. He was in great pain and couldn't walk. I went outside to borrow a wheelchair, pushed him, and took him to have the examinations. Before entering the examination room, he was so scared that he wanted to grab my hand. I quietly moved my hand away and handed him over to the nurse. I said to him, "Frank, I'll wait for you outside." He looked back at me and replied, "Okay." The door of the examination room was closed, and we were separated, as if we were in two different worlds. It was almost over, including his life. The biopsy results wouldn't come out until a week later. So I just went home to wait and hired a caregiver to take care of his daily life. He was in so much pain that he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep, muttering my name and our daughter's name. Hearing what the caregiver said, I just found it ridiculous. When the child was born, he disliked that it was a daughter. Now that he was dying, he kept talking about her nonstop. A week later, the biopsy results came out, and I went to the hospital to get them. As I expected, it was already at an advanced stage, and he had at most 3 months to live. Frank always had stomachaches after socializing and often took painkillers. I don't know since when, whenever he ate something cold or spicy, he would always have a stomachache and then take painkillers. I always thought it was because of his socializing and drinking. I had been urging him to have a physical examination, but he didn't pay attention to it. This year, I had someone force him to go for an examination. The results were sent to me after they came out, and that's why he went. There were too many things, and it was too chaotic. He had already forgotten about the physical examination. The doctor said, "Let the patient do what he wants and eat what he wants. Who cares what he wants to do or eat?" I just wanted to send him back to his hometown and hand him over to his parents. I didn't even want to accompany him on his last journey. I walked slowly to the door with the results in hand, looked at the person inside, and suppressed the smile at the corner of my mouth. I walked in, handed the results to Frank, and said softly, "It's colon cancer. You should still have a few months to live." He read the words on it word by word and suddenly grabbed the corner of my clothes. "Impossible, Winnie. It's impossible. There must be a misdiagnosis. How could I have cancer? There's no misdiagnosis. This is the diagnosis result." I pushed his hand away and took 2 steps back. As the saying goes, he who sows the wind will reap the whirlwind. You should know this, right? He leaned against the head of the bed dejectedly, and there was no light in his eyes. And I turned around and left. If he wanted to stay in the hospital, he could stay in the hospital. If he wanted to go to see his parents and accompany them on their last journey, I would find someone to send him away anyway, I wouldn't accompany him. When I got home, the baby's crying awakened the only bit of softness left in my heart. I walked forward, took her from Andy's arms, and chatted with her. In the future, in this world, only my daughter and I would be family, everything I had would be hers. I wouldn't help anyone else anymore. Frank didn't go back to his hometown. He was downstairs at my house every day, and I didn't know what he was waiting for. In the past half a month, Frank had lost a lot of weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Perhaps because of his stomachache, he often held his stomach. I went downstairs to buy groceries, and suddenly he stopped me. Winnie, could you please let me see the child? Gigi is my daughter. I'm begging you to let me see her. I looked at him, pushed his hand away, and suddenly smiled. When you were in bed with another woman, didn't you think that I was still pregnant with your child? When you were on the phone in the bathroom, didn't you think that your child had just been born? Now that you're dying, you remember that you still have a child. Why didn't you think of it earlier? Then he knelt down straight at my feet. He said, I'm wrong. I'm really wrong. I know I'm wrong. Could you please let me see her one last time? Tears welled up in his eyes, seeming to show his remorse, but if he hadn't gotten sick, would he have regretted it? The answer was obviously no. If Shirley had given birth to a pair of twins for him, would he have regretted it? Of course not. He might even have been glad that abandoning our mother and daughter was the rightest decision he had ever made. Seeing his behavior like this, I frowned slightly and looked at him with a smile. After you die, I'll take Gigi to your funeral. But as long as you're alive, I won't let her see you even once. I'm afraid your dirty eyes will defile my daughter. I walked forward on my own, leaving him behind. He followed me closely. After a while, I heard someone in the crowd say, "Who is this? Why did he faint?" I paused and looked back. It was Frank. I called 120 right there. Soon, the ambulance took me and Frank to the hospital together. After the rescue efforts, he still couldn't be saved. His face was covered with a white cloth, and he had no breath anymore, and I stood there, quietly watching him being pushed to the morgue. It took me a long time to come back to my senses. Tears welled up in my eyes. I felt a bit complicated inside. I didn't feel any sense of relief, nor did I feel sad. There were hardly any ripples in my heart. I called Frank's parents and asked them to come to see him one last time. His mother threw herself on him and kept crying. His name was Frank, and his parents' expectations for him could be seen just from his name. I stepped forward to help his mother up and said softly, "Mom, the dead are gone. Those who are alive still have to live well. Frank wouldn't want to see you like this." She cried and asked me, "How could this happen?" She repeated this sentence over and over again. It was true that Frank had betrayed me. But it was also true that Frank's mother had been kind to me. Every year when we went back to our hometown, she always made new cotton-padded clothes and quilts for me. Even if we only stayed at home for 2 days, she still did it every year. I didn't know anyone in my life except her. She fainted from crying and was sent to the emergency room. Frank's father lowered his head and said to me, "Winnie, we don't know anything here. We'll leave the funeral arrangements to you." "Okay," I replied in a low voice. I found a funeral car and took him to be cremated. And I bought a cemetery plot for him. On the day of the memorial service, many people came. The nanny held the child and stood aside, and I bowed to them at the entrance. I kept my promise. After he died, I held the child to see him one last time. From now on, I won't mention him to the child. I'll just say that your father passed away long ago. The people who came also presented a bouquet of flowers for Frank. After his ashes were buried, everything returned to calm. I sent Frank's parents back to their hometown and gave them a large sum of money at the same time so that they could enjoy their remaining years in comfort. Before leaving, Frank's mother held my hand and said to me, "Winnie, from now on, this will be your home. You should come back often." "I will," I replied like this. But what I thought in my heart was that unless they were seriously ill and needed to be taken to the city for treatment, I probably wouldn't come back again in this lifetime. I drove the car and slowly made my way back. Scenes from when we were young flashed before my eyes one after another. When we were young, we had truly loved each other. Ending up like this, I also felt a bit of regret. If Frank hadn't cheated during our marriage, we would have been a very happy family of three. The child would have had a gentle father and a mother who loved her. It's a pity that the past can't be chased back, and everything has been settled. Extra chapter, Frank's story. I fainted at a business dinner. I went to the hospital for an examination and found out that I had cancer. When I woke up, the first person I saw was Winnie. Her expression was calm, without any waves, and there was no sign of heartache in her eyes. At that moment, I suddenly remembered that whenever I came back from a business dinner, she would always pour me a glass of warm water and gently remind me, "Don't drink so much wine. It's really bad for your health." At that time, I just perfunctorily dealt with her after drinking the water. On that peaceful afternoon, scenes from the past appeared before my eyes. It was when Winnie and I first met, when we got married, and when she gave birth. I had forgotten when I started to feel tired of Winnie. Maybe it was every time when I came back from working overtime at night and she would always chatter about trifles of daily life. I didn't like listening to those things, but I still had to deal with her. If I ignored her, she would give me the silent treatment. Sometimes it lasted for a day, sometimes for a week. Year after year, I got a bit tired of it. I had someone new outside. That girl was very similar to Winnie when she was young. She was pretty, gentle, and bright. Anyway, she seemed perfect in every aspect. I started to travel on business frequently and found all kinds of reasons not to go home. I didn't know if Winnie had noticed it, but I still treated her as before. In this way, I kept it from her year after year until just before she gave birth. The person outside told me that she was also pregnant and began to force me to marry her. I had such an idea and took out the divorce agreement that I had prepared long ago and read it over and over again. I thought that after the child's first birthday, I would bring up the divorce with Winnie, but she caught me red-handed in my dirty deeds. She went crazy. And the woman behind me was so gentle even when she cried, which made me want to protect her. I subconsciously protected her. That day, I brought up the divorce with Winnie, and she also signed the divorce agreement. After some time, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau to handle the divorce formalities. When the cooling-off period was almost over, she suddenly changed her mind. I didn't know why either. Now that I think about it, there must have been a reason. These memories haunted me in my dreams every night and kept me awake every night. I wanted to see my daughter, even just for the last time, but I waited downstairs day after day until Winnie went downstairs. I stopped her and put forward my request. She didn't let me see. She said that after I died, she would take the child to my funeral to see me off. I followed her closely, and my body couldn't help but lean backward. It seemed that I was dying. Actually, Winnie was right. If I hadn't gotten sick, I wouldn't have regretted it either. Because I would have had a better life. Although the company wasn't big, I could still live a comfortable life. There would surely be someone else following me, and I would have another family, but now, I'm dying. Everything has come to an end, and the past is all in the past. So be it. On the day I divorced Tristan, I booked a flight ticket to go home on the same day. The nanny sent me a message saying that there were still some handicrafts left that hadn't been taken away. Just throw them all away. They're not worth anything. She also said that Silas's teacher had mentioned that there would be a parents' meeting. Silas was just like his heartless father. That woman just had to beckon with her finger and he would follow her around eagerly. The flight attendant came over to remind me to turn off my phone. I said the last sentence. Doesn't he have a father? At worst he also has a new mother. Go and find them. 1 month ago it was my son Silas's birthday. I cooked a meal and went to pick him up, but the teacher said that his father had picked him up earlier. I waited for the father and son at the dining table for the whole night. What I got instead was Aurora's WeChat Moments post. Children should be happy. Happy birthday, Silas. The picture attached was a selfie of her Tristan and Silas in KFC looking like a happy family. Aurora Silas. How ironic. The child I gave birth to with so much pain was used by Tristan to commemorate his dead love. Even more ridiculously, I didn't even know about the child until he was 3 years old. The next day when they came back, when Tristan saw me, a hint of guilt flashed across his face, but soon he became tough again, ready for me to lose my temper. But I didn't question him. I just told him to have a good rest and took out and confiscated the fruit candies from Silas's pocket. That I was prepared for Silas to throw a tantrum, but this time he snatched the candies back. "Mean woman, you're stealing my candies." I was shocked. I had never taught my child to swear. I had even corrected every word and deed of the nanny. "A baby mommy taught you that you can't." "I don't want mommy. Woo, I want Aunt Aurora." I couldn't believe it and wanted to question Tristan, but he had already closed the door of the study. In the following month Silas was either taken away by Tristan to play with Aurora or resisted my discipline. Even he picked up toys and threw them at me. "Stinky mommy, go away. I want Aunt Aurora to be my mommy." At this moment my heart was completely chilled. Closing my eyes, I heard the roaring sound of the plane. This southern city seemed so small. I remembered what Tristan asked when we were going through the formalities. "Astra, are you sure you want to go this far? You're an adult. Why are you fussing over what a child says?" I replied, "President Tristan, you know that what the child says has never been the biggest problem between us." He let out a long sigh and cooperated to finish the formalities. It only took 4 hours to fly from south to north. The plane landed after I took a nap. My mother drove her red car to pick me up. "Hurry up and go back to clean up your pigsty. The living room is full of the things you sent back." Just as I was about to sigh with emotion about returning to my hometown that I hadn't seen for 7 years. My mother didn't ask me about the divorce, just like I never asked where my father was. After returning home, I started to pack up my clothes, jewelry, and bags. These were all I had in the 7 years with Tristan. Where there was love there was money, however I had never won Tristan's love. These were just perfunctory gifts he gave to maintain peace every time I was angry. I sorted them out and sold some that I didn't like. The money from this plus my previous salary barely added up to over 2 million yuan. But in this northern city it was enough for me to live a laid-back life. After lying at home for 2 months, my mother couldn't stand it anymore. "Lying at home all day long, you've gained 2 circles of fat around your waist. I've got you a fitness card. Hurry up and lose weight." Helplessly I had to walk on the treadmill for 2 laps every day. "Hey, Miss Astra?" Today when I was walking on the treadmill again with a look of despair, a woman in her 40s stopped me. "I'm Elsa from Inching Technology." I seem to remember this person. Miss Astra doesn't remember? "We met in Pengcheng 3 years ago." I remembered. That was the last project I handled as Tristan's chief assistant. Inching was our biggest competitor and the female boss of the other side was very capable. Unexpectedly, I would be remembered by the boss of a competitor from 3 years ago. When Elsa learned that I didn't have a job, she enthusiastically invited me to join their company. "But, President Zhao, I've been a full-time mother for 3 years, Miss Astra, believe in your abilities. All you need to do is to understand the current market. Besides, you're divorced. It doesn't make sense if you don't focus on your career." After a conversation, I finally decided to join President Zhao's company. However, I started as a project specialist. Without understanding the market, I didn't dare to take on projects rashly. After starting to work, I lived a fulfilling life every day, and my mother no longer urged me to go out for a walk every day. I seemed to have gone back to 7 years ago when I hadn't fallen in love with Tristan and hadn't given birth to Silas. I didn't have to make soup on time every day, nor did I have to accommodate the light taste of the Tristan family and eat dishes with less oil and salt. Half a year later I became a project manager. 1 year later I became a project director. 2 years later I became the head of the project department. "President Astra, the Tristan family will come to inspect the project in person and ask you to go through the contract with them." Project manager Tim reported while holding the proposal. She was brought up by me. The project in cooperation with the Tristan family was the first project she handled. Even if they didn't ask me to, I would still participate. "Okay, you make the arrangements. Don't be nervous. Just do it as usual." Tim breathed a sigh of relief. "I'll feel more at ease with you here. I'll arrange the dinner party for tomorrow night." "Okay." To my surprise, Tristan was the one leading the team from the Tristan family this time. What was even more unexpected was that he was holding Silas by the hand. "Mom," as soon as Silas saw me, he broke free from his father's hand and rushed towards me. I hadn't seen him for 2 years and he had grown a lot taller and stronger. Even though I was prepared, I was still pushed back a step. Little kid, you've got the wrong person. I'm not your mom. But he hugged my thigh tightly and wouldn't let go. President Tristan, it's not appropriate to bring a child when discussing business, right? I gritted my teeth and looked at the man. There's nothing I can do. The child hasn't seen his mom for 2 years. He spread his hands and the plain ring on the ring finger of his left hand was very conspicuous. That was the wedding ring between him and me. Could it be that he hadn't married Aurora? In the end, it was Tim who led the business dinner. I didn't even have the energy to follow. There was no other reason. At the dinner table, 2 people surnamed Gu surrounded me from both sides. One tried hard to ask me to take food and the other tried hard to put food in my bowl. If I didn't have good professional ethics, I would have lost my temper on the spot. After the meal, I found an opportunity to slip away. When I was leaving the parking lot, I saw Tristan holding Silas and standing at the entrance, which was the only way for me to get out. They looked like lost dogs. I sneered. What new trick was this? I walked straight past them without stopping. Silas had sharp eyes and pointed at my car and shouted, "Mom, Mom." After all, he was my own child and I couldn't bear to see him like this. But when I thought of the look of hatred in his eyes 2 years ago, the bitterness suppressed the reluctance in my heart at this moment. After taking a shower and lying on the bed, I tossed and turned. The story between Tristan and me was actually quite cliched. We met when we were in graduate school. He was a senior student 1 year ahead of me. When graduating, he said, the annual salary starts at 300,000 yuan. So I traveled across most of China from Dengzhou to Pengcheng. I helped him rise from the deputy general manager of a subsidiary of the Tristan family to the person in charge of the Tristan family. My annual salary also increased from 300,000 yuan to 600,000 yuan. At the beginning, although I had strong working ability, I didn't understand some unspoken rules in the business world at all. I was like a novice and it was Tristan who led me forward step by step. I inevitably developed feelings for him other than those related to money. But I knew that he had a little first love surnamed Shen abroad, and I would help Tristan order gifts and send them to her every festival. So I hid this feeling in a small corner of my heart. 4 years ago, on the day when my salary arrived in the account and the balance in my bank card finally reached 2 million yuan, I got a bit carried away and wanted to resign. That day I could have just sent Tristan, who was drunk because of being dumped by his little first love, home and then got off work. But he grabbed my hand and said, "Don't go. President Tristan, I'm Astra." The man's voice was thick. At that time I thought that since I was leaving and wouldn't see him again next month, it would be okay to sleep with him once. That night I was quite satisfied, except that when our passion reached its peak he called out Aurora, which made me unhappy. The chaos of that night made my resignation plan 1 month earlier, but it wasn't a big problem. However, Tristan rejected my resignation application. Astra, you're 28, not 18. Distinguish between work and life. I sent my resignation letter to his email and copied it to the HR department. President Tristan, I can distinguish them clearly. Since you don't approve it, it's okay for me to receive 1 more month's salary. 1 month later, when I was handling the resignation formalities, Tristan's mother was also there. Coincidentally, I had been having stomach acid those days and would retch easily. She smiled and joked that I was like her when she was pregnant with Tristan and asked me to take good care of my stomach. The expressions on both Tristan's and my faces changed. He took me to the hospital without hesitation. The result was obvious. I was 4.5 weeks pregnant, and it was that night. President Tristan, actually, an abortion is very quick. Tristan frowned tightly and I was still the considerate secretary. Shut up. I didn't want him to take responsibility, but he insisted. The meticulous care during our marriage and pregnancy rekindled the love in my heart that I had hidden in the corner. Actually, I would rather not have this hope so that the disappointment wouldn't be so painful. Ding, the alarm clock woke me up. It was time to go to work again. My assistant had been waiting at the door of the office long ago. President Astra, the Tristan family is here again. Let them find Tim. Manager Wang can't handle it. She asked me to come to you. I pushed the door open and entered the conference room. Tim was stuttering because of Tristan's questions. After all, most of what I taught Tim was also taught by Tristan, so it was normal that she couldn't handle it. Since Manager Wang can't explain clearly, I'll have to trouble President Astra to give me a detailed explanation. Tristan propped his face up and looked at me. President Tristan, what else don't you understand? The PPT on the projection had already been turned to the last page. Tim must have explained everything that could be explained. He just wanted to make things difficult for me. Well, I don't know what to do if a child's skin is cracked. I could see from Tim's expression that she was at a loss. I asked her to go out first and calm down. What on earth do you want to do? I want you to come home with me. The child needs a mother, and I need a wife. I can answer questions about work. President Tristan, please solve your personal matters by yourself. Tristan was like a mouse pricked by a needle and was about to squeak and shout. I raised my hand to stop Tristan. President Tristan, it's working time now. Let's talk about personal matters later. Please distinguish between work and life. After saying that, I went to work. I didn't know when Tristan left. I was called to President Zhao's office. The incident of having dinner last night and Tristan deliberately finding fault this morning had spread. Do you want to take a few days off to deal with personal matters? Let's talk about it when you come back? President Zhao was a smart person. She didn't want to do things that cultivated talents for other companies. I immediately said no and that I could definitely handle personal matters well. Tristan hadn't shown up for several days and I had been too busy to spare any time either. Finally, I got off work early that day. As soon as I arrived at the parking lot, I saw Gu brothers standing beside my car waiting for me. It was really like having a pillow when you're sleepy. Astra, can we talk about personal matters now? I took them to a nearby coffee shop to chat. As soon as we sat down, Tristan got straight to the point. When are we getting remarried? Remarried? Are you kidding me? My career is thriving now. Would I remarry and become a full-time mom? Impossible. I've changed the child's name. It's Asher now. Aurora is already married and I haven't been in touch with her for a long time. What else are you dissatisfied with? If it were me 3 years ago, I might have been tempted to compromise. Because at that time in my world there were only my prematurely born son and my busy husband, but not now. There's a broader world behind me, so naturally I won't cherish that tiny cage. President Tristan, I don't love you, and of course I won't remarry you. Let me guess why you didn't marry Miss Shen. Is it because she finally chose someone else? And the reason you want to come to me is just that a bit of the throbbing from our youth has touched you. You even used your son's name as a bargaining chip. Tristan's face turned purple and then blue alternately. No matter what you say, don't you love me or the child? A 5-year-old child can't bear to hear that his mother doesn't love him. Silas opened his mouth and burst into loud sobs. Mommy loves Asher. He threw himself into my arms and asked me to hold him. I hadn't held the child for 2 years and my posture was rather clumsy. He wasn't that little baby who asked for kisses in my arms when he was young. He was a boy who would take his Ultraman toy to hit me for Aunt Aurora. President Tristan, I admit that I had fantasies about you when I was young, but they were all worn away by repeated disappointments. Tristan's deep eyes were full of remorse. Once upon a time, I also thought that his feelings were genuine. I remember that on the 4th day of the 35th week of my pregnancy, Tristan rarely didn't come home, and I received a picture on my mobile phone. It was a selfie of a girl. She was stretching out her tongue to lick the ice cream in Tristan's hand, and Tristan was looking at her with a doting expression. The sender, Shirley Shen. It was a name I was all too familiar with. I had been helping Tristan send her gifts for 3 years. That day, I gave birth prematurely and had a massive hemorrhage. I almost died on the operating table. Silas had to stay in the incubator for 3 months right after he was born. When I woke up, Tristan was already sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand and saying that I had been through a lot. I took out the picture on my phone and showed it to him. Aurora was heartbroken. I was afraid that something bad would happen to her. I didn't expect that you would give birth prematurely by so many days either. If it weren't for this picture, the child wouldn't have suffered. After saying that, I closed my eyes and didn't want to listen to his excuses anymore. Throughout the whole confinement period, I didn't say another word to him. I remember that I only started talking to him again when he gave me a Hermes limited edition bag. Since there was no love left, I might as well get some money. Believe me, I never touched her. Tristan was speaking earnestly. Of course, I knew that he hadn't touched Aurora. Tristan had his own very strict moral standards in his heart, otherwise, he wouldn't have insisted on taking responsibility when I was pregnant with Silas. But so what? President Tristan, isn't emotional infidelity also a form of infidelity? I put the child back into Tristan's arms. As for the child, I've never liked investments with high risks and low returns. It's already remarkable that the maternal love brought by the pregnancy hormones lasted until he was 3 years old. Before Silas's 3rd birthday, I loved him deeply. I would breastfeed him day and night to take care of him as a premature baby. I forced myself to drink all kinds of soups to ensure breast milk supply. I would also wipe his little body every 2 hours when he was sick with a fever. With my care, 3-year-old Silas gradually got rid of the weakness of being a premature baby. But he wanted to change his mother. I lowered my eyes and looked at teary-eyed Silas. President Tristan, why does he still remember me? Obviously he could have a new mother. Tristan lowered his head to coax the child. Astra, do you have to trample on my self-esteem like this? It was me. I showed him our wedding photo every day. It was me. I missed you. But I don't miss you. What you miss isn't me, but a secretary who takes good care of him and a housekeeper who can help take care of the child well. He shook his head. Go back, President Tristan. Tristan gritted his teeth and said that I was heartless. If I weren't heartless, how could I have worked my way up from the small city to enter the same key university as him and complete my postgraduate studies? If I weren't heartless, how could my mother and I have established ourselves in society? This conversation ended on a bad note. The next day I heard from Tim that President Tristan had already returned to Pengcheng. I had expected it. How many days could the president leave the group's business aside to focus on a small project? The day before yesterday was already the limit. After they left, I resumed my peaceful life. Winning projects, taking on projects, following up on projects. Time flew by, and before I knew it, it was the end of the year. I planned the time to take my mother to buy New Year's goods. This was the first New Year that I had spent with my mother in the 7 years since I graduated and started working. When I worked for the Tristan family, I had to be on standby 24 hours a day, and there was an endless amount of work. In order to have a few more days off, I didn't travel back and forth. After marrying Tristan and having Silas, I had even less time to come back. I dragged my mother to go shopping in the mall like crazy, buying lots of things, trying to make up for what I owed her in those years. When we were carrying big and small bags of New Year's goods and going back home, there were 2 figures, one big and one small, sitting at the door with 4 or 5 gift boxes beside them. My heart skipped a beat. It was Tristan with Asher. The winter in Dengzhou was -10 degrees. Were these 2 just sitting at my door wearing thin coats? Asher's voice calling "Grandma" was already hoarse. My mother rubbed his face for him. Mom. Tristan rubbed his hands. Stop. Don't call me Mom. You've already divorced my daughter. Afraid that these 2 would really catch a cold, especially Asher. My mother let them come in to warm up by the heater. I was a bit worried that my mother would be reluctant to part with Asher. I had only reported good news and not bad news before, and didn't tell the specific details of what happened back then. She had only seen Asher once or twice. When I called before the divorce, I often mentioned him. After the divorce, seeing that I didn't bring the child with me, she didn't dare to mention it. Now that she saw the child, she couldn't help but dote on him. As soon as we entered the door, she made cold medicine for him and got a small blanket for him. Tristan had changed his strategy this time and wanted to win over my mother. Well, he had miscalculated. My mother was even tougher than me. President Tristan, have you booked a hotel? We don't have an extra room for you to sleep in at our home. My mother's words froze the flattering and ingratiating smile on Tristan's face. Auntie, I haven't had time to book yet. Didn't you book a hotel? Are you going to let my dear grandson freeze with you? My mother shook her leg, which made Asher giggle. I won't be cold. Tristan said that he would go back to Pengcheng right away and that he had come this time to send his grandson to spend the new year with my mother. When my mother heard that, she thought it was great. There would be no annoying ex-son-in-law and she could spend the new year with her daughter and grandson and enjoy family happiness. I didn't stop it and I couldn't stop it either. Because as soon as my mother said okay, Tristan left. Mom, you really held me back this time. My mood and attitude couldn't escape my mother's sharp eyes. She noticed that I wasn't fond of Asher. Every time Asher called me Mom, I ignored him. When he wanted to cuddle with me, I dodged. When he asked me to teach him to do his homework, I just gave him the answers directly. Every time my mother would mediate in the middle and coax him to be happy. Finally one day my mother really couldn't bear to see me like this. She asked me why and then I told her the details of the divorce. After listening, she felt sorry for me. Daughter, Mom understands you. But Mom is afraid that you'll regret it. I smiled. Mom, if Dad had fought for my custody back then, would you have given me to him? She nodded. I said, then what do I have to regret? Both my mother and I are perfectionists. If love has impurities, then we'd rather not have it. When I was a child, I heard from my grandmother that my father had an affair when my mother was pregnant. My mother insisted on getting a divorce even though she was pregnant. At that time she was too far along in her pregnancy to have an abortion. Otherwise I wouldn't have been born. At that time my mother also thought about leaving me to be raised by my father, but after he found out that I was a girl he never showed up again. So my mother understood me. Asher is 6 years old now. He's very perceptive. He sensed that even Grandma didn't seem to like him that much. His mother didn't love him and his grandma didn't love him either. But he didn't cry or make a fuss. Instead he became even quieter. I don't know how Tristan taught him. The little master who grew up in a wealthy family wasn't willful at all. Sometimes he would even help my mother pick vegetables and shakily bring me a glass of water. In the end my mother still softened her heart and would occasionally coax and hug him. Privately she told me to let his father come and pick him up earlier. As soon as the new year was over I called Tristan and asked him to pick up the child. Tristan came and had a serious conversation with me. He asked, really, can't you give me another chance? I shook my head. What about the child? President Tristan, you've taught him very well. He can grow up without a mother. Tristan sighed as if resigned to his fate. I had already expected that this would be the outcome, but I always wanted to give it another try. What if you were willing to come back? I smiled without saying a word and took him home to pick up Asher. The taxi stopped opposite my house. I held Asher's hand and crossed the road. Mom, can Asher still come to play during the summer vacation? Mom, can you attend the parents' meeting for me? Other kids say I don't have a mom. He asked with tears in his eyes. I said we'd see. His crying made me feel so distracted and a bit guilty. Had I really gone too far? Even for a strange child I wouldn't have put on such a cold face. Actually, before Aurora came back Asher was very obedient. He only ate 2 candies a day. Even if there were no candies he would just roll on the ground once. I taught him to recite the 3-character classic, and he learned it very quickly. He would sway his head and speak in a cute way that melted people's hearts. I was immersed in these emotions and couldn't extricate myself. Until Tristan shouted, "Watch out!" Bang! Asher and I were pushed aside and Tristan fell into a pool of blood. Tristan, how are you? Don't scare me. It turned out that I only paid attention to the green light for pedestrians and saw that there was no car on Tristan's side. But halfway across a car on my side ran the red light. I tremblingly dialed 120. Don't be afraid. I'm okay. Tristan fainted after saying that. The ambulance arrived soon. My mother came down and took the child home first. I followed to the hospital. The forearm and 3 ribs are broken and there's a mild concussion. Fortunately it wasn't too serious. Tristan woke up and looked at me in confusion. Don't pretend to have amnesia. The doctor said it's just a mild concussion. His eyes instantly became clear. I hired a caregiver for Tristan but he wasn't too happy about it. It'll be okay if you come to see me often. I don't need others to take care of me. Sorry, I don't have time to visit you. How can you talk to your savior like that? The sky cleared and the rain stopped. He thought he was back in the game again. Tristan, What tricks are you trying to play again? Do you think I'll be moved by you? I'm telling you, it's impossible. Because of you, I gave birth to Asher prematurely and almost died. Even if you died, at most we'd be even. After saying that, I left without caring about Tristan's reaction. A week later, I took Asher to see his father and then contacted Tristan's assistant to take him away. The spring festival was over. I had to go back to work and he had to go to school. When Tristan left, he came to my company to find me. For the cooperation project, the Tristan family is willing to give up 5 percentage points of profit. This concession meant profit for me. I quickly asked the legal and financial departments to redraft the contract. I was as excited as if I had got a high score in an exam. In a place where I didn't notice, Tristan's eyes were full of indulgence, just like when he looked at Aurora in the past. After Tristan and his son left, I devoted myself wholeheartedly to work. President Zhao asked me if I wanted to find another partner. I said forget it. Compared with the illusory love, I preferred the tangible money. We both smiled at each other. We had been cooperating on projects with the Tristan family all the time. Every year when it was time to renew the contract, Tristan would come. Sometimes he would come to my office to see me and sit down to exchange a few pleasantries. Sometimes he would have a meal with me in the name of inviting project colleagues to dinner. I had come to terms with it. I didn't avoid him like before anymore. There was someone willing to give money away. I just had to let him take a look at me and have a meal together. I didn't lose anything later. President Zhao thought that the development in Incheng was restricted. She wanted to start her own business independently. She asked me if I wanted to join her. I thought about it and thought it was okay that I was still young. Working hard for 10 years to accumulate promotion capital wasn't a bad idea, even if it didn't work out. I had never failed in work matters, so I also resigned and started my own business with her. When it was time to renew the contract with the Tristan family, Tristan didn't see me in Inching. He called me furiously. Why didn't you tell me that you resigned? There's no need. It doesn't affect anything. Without you, who will earn the 5 percentage points of profit that I gave up? I felt a bit regretful that I had let the money slip out of my pocket. Oh, send me the company name, and I'll ask the legal department to change the contract. Okay, the name of the new company that President Zhao and I founded was chosen casually. It was called Fenghua Shueyue. Tristan snorted and laughed when he heard it. At this age, you still want to indulge in romantic affairs? It's none of your business. Now that I'm also a boss, I have enough confidence when I speak. I'm no longer respectful to Tristan. When President Zhao learned that I had taken over the orders from the Tristan family, she happily ran to my office to open champagne. If it were me who just graduated, I would rather not make money than cooperate with the Tristan family. I should thank Tristan. It was he who gradually turned me into a shrewd person. Our Fenghua Shueyue didn't take 10 years. Just in 5 years, it entered the first tier of the industry. On the day of listing, we held a thank you evening party. The main purpose was to build good relationships with our partners. Tristan, the president of the Tristan family, attended with his son. The little kid who used to cry for his mom had grown into a teenager. Asher, who had grown up, really looked like his father or mom. President Astra, congratulations. Asher found me blowing wind on the balcony. Thank you. I smiled at him, but he said, I'm sorry. I was confused. I apologize for my behavior when I was 3 years old. I still keep the little tiger and little rabbit toys you made for me. I took a look at his phone. They were the things I asked the nanny to throw away when we got divorced. It turned out that in recent years, he had always been clamoring for his mom. Tristan couldn't persuade him otherwise and told him about what happened back then. So he knew what he had done when he was a child. More than 10 years had passed. I had almost forgotten the pain from back then. The family affection was gone. Now Asher was standing in front of me just as an outstanding heir of a business partner. Don't feel so burdened. That was just the trigger for the divorce between your father and me. His eyes were filled with joy. Then, Mom. I raised my hand to stop him and continued, compared with the word Mom, I prefer others to call me President Astra. I'm not the kind of person who will be moved by others keeping my discarded things. He put his phone away and looked straight at me. But you're my mom. You gave birth to me, but you abandoned me just because of a few words I said when I was a child. Actually, he hadn't changed. He was still that child who would scold and beat me just because I confiscated his candies. Not to mention that I couldn't take him away with me at that time. Even if I had been determined to take him away and raise him alone, now the reason he would blame me wouldn't be for abandoning him but for why I made him suffer hardships with me. Asher realized that this sentence was a bit impolite and quickly apologized. I shook my head. Actually, if you want a mother, there will be lots of women rushing to be one. But just like your father, you always think what you can't get is the best. He looked thoughtful. These words were difficult for him to understand at present, however. Tristan was a living example right in front of him. I had long lost love for both the father and the son, and I didn't have any hatred either. As a business partner, I really admired Tristan. But it was just limited to that. When I got the news that Tristan had passed away, I was on vacation on the beach in the southern hemisphere. President Astra, Dad is gone. It was a myocardial infarction. Please accept my condolences. I flew back to attend his funeral. Actually, he was still quite young, only 58 years old. Asher was holding his portrait. The onset of the illness was very sudden, and he didn't suffer much. I stood in front of Tristan's tombstone. Let's not meet again in the next life. Male protagonist's perspective. There was a huge gap from school to the Tristan family. My father wasn't my grandfather's favorite child, and I could only work in a small subsidiary in an out-of-the-way place. I was unwilling and determined to strive for more. However, I had just been parachuted in for a year and didn't have any reliable assistance at all, which really worried me. Until I saw the moments of my junior schoolmate Astra. She was looking for a job after graduation. Astra was the person I admired the most in college. She was capable, beautiful, and flexible. So I contacted her. Actually, I was a bit nervous because the annual salary I could offer her at that time was only 300,000 yuan. I was afraid that she would think it was too little. Fortunately, she came. I knew that I wouldn't make a wrong judgment. It only took us 3 years to take over the Tristan family. I stood in the highest office of the Tristan family building. Looking down at the startup street downstairs, I was filled with boundless passion. But while I was successful in my career, I was frustrated in my love life. Aurora didn't know what was wrong with her. She said that I spent less time with her, but I would ask Astra to buy her all kinds of gifts for every festival without missing any. Moreover, she was studying in the UK far away and was also very busy with her studies. Even if I went there, she might not have time to stay with me. I was so busy, wasn't it all for giving her a better future? Compared with Astra, she was not sensible at all. Aurora unilaterally broke up with me and started dating a white boy. I saw her official announcement. Couldn't our years of relationship compare with 3 years of company? That night, I drank too much. It was Astra who sent me home. At that time, I couldn't tell whether it was because of the alcohol or that I had already fallen in love. What a ridiculous night. When I went to work the next day, Astra actually submitted her resignation. I didn't allow it. She had been by my side for these years, and I had long been used to her presence. I wouldn't approve it. However, the labor law didn't allow me not to approve it. I could only keep her for 1 more month at most. I had to compromise. My mother accidentally found out that Astra was pregnant. I was going to be a father. Wanting to be a father is probably a common trait among men. I proposed to Astra. Actually, I had known that Astra liked me for a long time. Sure enough, she agreed. However, I overestimated my sense of morality. When I saw Aurora's moments about getting drunk because of the breakup, I was extremely worried. I flew to the UK to see her. Sure enough, only I could make her smile again. When I was immersed in this immoral joy, my mother called and said that Astra had given birth prematurely. I was so worried that I jumped up immediately. I was angry that Astra was so thoughtless this time and interrupted me, and also angry that I had actually done such a thing. The reason for Astra's premature birth was the photo sent by Aurora. I just thought that it was Aurora's little girl's thoughts playing tricks. I knew that it had hurt Astra, but she was easy to coax. Just a Hermes bag would do. I knew deeply that there was no possibility between Aurora and me. I named the child Silas. Aurora's full name was Aurora. I often got up in the middle of the night to check Aurora's moments, swimming, checking in at delicious food places, visiting art exhibitions. She was so lively and vivid, something that Astra didn't have. After Aurora returned to China, she asked me to bring Silas to play with her. They were like two little kids, liking candies and KFC. These were what Astra didn't allow Silas to eat, but just for 1 or 2 meals, nothing would go wrong. I forgot that it was Silas's birthday that day, and that's how Astra found out. It wasn't a big problem. She was wholeheartedly devoted to the child at that time and wouldn't do anything serious. Silas said a few words to Astra and then she wanted a divorce. I knew that she was angry with me and Aurora, but since I hadn't made any principled mistakes, and since she insisted, I could only sign the papers. Astra left, and I stood in the empty bedroom, feeling like there was a hole in my heart. Aurora came and took Silas to run around and play crazily, but I actually felt annoyed. Astra would always teach Silas 3-character classic and Tang poems in a gentle voice. I missed that voice until that day when I heard Silas call Aurora Mom. I suddenly woke up from a dream. No. His mother was Astra and could only be Astra. I refused Aurora's proposal and disciplined Silas by imitating the way Astra did in my memory. I told him who his mother was and changed Silas's name. I realized that I had long been used to having Astra by my side. Without her, my life was like air. When I learned that the cooperation partner for the company's new project was Astra, I took Asher to negotiate in person, but she didn't want me or the child. What a heartless woman. She quietly took my heart away and then threw it away harshly. But strangely, I couldn't get angry with her. She wanted to make money, and I would just give it to her. I directly gave her a 5 percentage point profit concession. Seeing her as happy as a child, I was also happy. She didn't want to touch feelings anymore, so I would accompany her. Even if it was just in the capacity of a business partner. 1 second before death, memories flashed through my mind like a revolving lantern. All of them were about Astra, her youthful appearance in school, her powerful presence at the negotiation table, her when she was pregnant. Astra, in the next life, I want to meet you again. The end.